Take your seats. We're going to get started with the second half. So after the great start in terms of understanding the fundamentals of AI and where we're at, this second half is actually going to focus on jobs and the future of work. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Moshe Vardi from Rice.
Thank you. So the goal of the first session was to scare all of us a little bit, and now we'll go on and try to think about the consequences for this. Fantastic. So we all heard, thank you very much. So we all heard this morning how our next ride to the airport will be in this Waymo car. And indeed, if you go today to Silicon Valley, this is the big thing. This is the things that we kind of heard. There is a bit of a gold rush atmosphere about trying to automate driving, partly because some people estimate the market in many, many trillions of dollars over the next decade. There's kind of a debate on how quickly we're going to resolve the technical issues. This year, some people are starting to question some of what's been happening with deep learning. Partly, we don't understand why it's working so well. It turns out that there was an influential article from a Google researcher called The Alchemy of Deep Learning. Turned out that some of the claims are not reproducible. So, maybe we are coming a little bit from the top of the Gartner hype cycle, but still, it's very clear that something very big is going to happen. And, I don't know when it's going to happen. I hear some people say 5 years, other people say 15, 20 years. There are a huge number of legal issues will have to be resolved. It will be a huge business disruption. It's very, very clear. I mean, people are already thinking about how the organ transplant industry will be disrupted. Because right now we get most organ for transplantation from people who get killed in car crashes. And what happens when these people don't get killed? So hopefully we're going to 3D print organs before this happens. But clearly, I mean, one of the arguments for this to make it happen is that every year more than 1 million people get killed around the earth from car crashes. And so there is opportunity to save maybe 1 million lives per year, which I think is a fantastic societal benefit. But then you look at the chart like this, with a few years old, but I don't think it's changed much since then. And in the majority of the states, the most common job category is a truck driver. This is quite stunning. And this is in 29 states. This is the most common job category. And it means that now when we start thinking about automation of driving, we have to think about the impact of job losses. There are about 4 million truck and taxi drivers in the United States, including about 1 million Uber and Lyft and etc. drivers. There are even more. There are about 15 million jobs where driving is the first job responsibility. I mean, many things that you don't even think about, mostly what they do is they drive around. And once you automate driving, it's not just driving you're going to automate, but there's a whole logistical supply chain. You can already see, you go to YouTube and you can find container ports that are 99% automated. And the whole, warehouses, you can go and see now. Just last week, there was some news story about a large warehouse in China that has 4 people are operating a huge warehouse. So we're talking about a huge impact on the job market. But the line that you usually hear mostly from economists, not to worry, there will be new jobs that we cannot even imagine yet. This is the typical answer. There will be new jobs. And so this has now become a big debate among economists. And you find that economists who are kind of called them the neoclassical economists, and it said people have been worried about massive unemployment now for 200 years. Never happened, never will happen, nothing to worry about. Now you do find just this sentence that very often is ignored, long period of painful adjustment there. Even the economists admit it. And then we have to ask, long? How long? 5 years, 10 years, 50 years? Painful. How painful? We'll come back to that. And then on the other side, economists who proudly call themselves the new Luddites, like Paul Krugman, who write in the New York Times op-ed, can innovation and progress really hurt large number of workers, maybe even workers in general? The truth is that it can, and serious economists have been aware of this possibility for almost 2 centuries. So, who is right? The new Luddites, the new classical? Is it different this time? Is it not different? So if you're following this space, almost every week there is a new study. And every study tells you, every study is some projection for the future, and every study comes up with different findings. There are as many findings and there are studies. And so if you're trying to read these studies, and they come from academia, they come from various consulting companies, all kind of the World Economic Forum, etc., then you are left completely confused. And why so many predictions? Because the Danish proverb that says predictions are hard, especially about the future, is actually wrong. Predictions about the future are very easy. Go ahead, make your own prediction, especially make it for 30 years, and nobody's going to ever challenge you what will happen in 30 years. So instead, let's not make prediction. Let's look at the past. And I'm going to use for the case study US manufacturing. And the US is 25% of the world economy, so it's a huge fragment of the world economy, and it's a relatively laissez-faire economy. I mean, with relative to other economies, we're very unregulated economy. And manufacturing, unlike what you've heard, that it's all gone to Mexico and China, is a huge industry. It is bigger than US manufacturing, is about the same size as Germany, Korea, South Korea, France, Russia, Brazil, and UK combined. It's a huge industry. In fact, it's the largest US still. The largest economic sector in the United States is manufacturing. So what happened? Here is one chart that I found when I saw it, just mind-blowing. In terms of volume, we are at peak manufacturing. We're manufacturing about $2 trillion a year of net added value in constant dollars. But when it comes to employment, we peaked around 1980, and we have lost about 1/3 since then. We used to be about 20 million, and now we are around 12 million. So about 8 million jobs in manufacturing went away. And if you want to know, the answer is it's very simple, because we are much more productive. Over the last 20 years, we have roughly double productivity in manufacturing. So in fact, the fact that we have lost only 1/3 is kind of good news. We should have lost about 1/2 of manufacturing workforce. And now the question is, okay, this is a case study. The standard answer would be, these people have lost their jobs, they have found other jobs, everything worked out, happy end. But this is not what happened. Actually, the people who lost their job, this has been a huge adverse impact on middle class and working class people. This is something that really only has come to the fore in the last almost couple of years, partly because people ask what will happen, and answer is the election already showed us what happened when people are unhappy and upset. And the answer is that also the people, the opinionated class, the people who write op-eds and determine policies, live in a very different bubble, social bubble, than working class people. And if all the people here are educated professionals, and most likely your partner, life partner is educated professional, and your children are educated professionals, and your friends are educated professional, and you think this is the world we live in, there's a big world out there. And partly this is why meeting is about. We need to rethink about many standard economic dogma, and we need to rethink policies to address these issues. So the rest of the talk will be to try to document in excruciating detail, very quickly, actually the adverse impact that automation had on working class people. And there are 4 numbers that we need to pay attention to, and one is labor productivity, which drives economic growth, GDP, and then job created and household income. So what you see here is that roughly for 30 years, so 30, almost 40 years after World War II, this was the Goldilocks period. Productivity grew, GDP grew, we generated new jobs, income rose, everybody was happy. And you could look at this plot and think, okay, this must be some kind of economic law. All we have to worry about is about increasing productivity, and everybody will benefit. Except that something around 1980, something broke in the American economy. And what you can see now is that productivity continues to grow, and GDP continues to grow. But we are not creating as many jobs as we used to. and household income has stagnated. And just to see how much household income has stagnated, this is to me a gasp slide, because when I saw it, I had a hard time believing that this is true. This looks at the real median yearly income of white men with no college degree. And you see that between 75 and 2015, it actually declined.
Is it the same dollars?
Constant dollar, real means constant dollar, adjusted for inflation. And you know, in 2016, you saw many rallies in which you saw angry white men. And you know, I would looking and I said, what are they so angry about? You know, we used to see these rallies, right? People in the Middle East, you know, death to America. And now we see this angry white men here. And the answer is, well, that's what they're angry about. At least this is one thing they're angry about. And so this is one indication that really there was very harsh impact on working class people. And here is another one. So you hear a lot now about unemployment as a historical low point. But what you need to know that unemployment is a number that has been now for decades manipulated by politicians to look good. If you're working 1 hour a week, you're not unemployed anymore. So a better number to look at is called labor force participation, which is how many people are in the labor force. That means they're either working or looking for a job. And this focus on men. The picture for women, of course, is much more complicated because first they enter the workforce in the 1960s. And so I'm focusing only on men. And aged 25 to 54, which is called prime age male. That means mostly after education, before early retirement. And what you see here, that this number has been dropping now for about 50 years. And it's even starker when you stratify it by education. Because then you see that the impact on people with bachelor degree is, you know, the decline is from 98 to 94. It's not huge. But for people with working class, or people for high school education or less, it went from 97% to about 82%. And that means that if you actually look now in our economy, about 1 in 5 working class men, prime age, 25 to 54, is not working. This to me is a shocking number. This is a number we typically associate with economy in deep depression. And a number that have been discovered about 3 years ago, and we hear a lot about it all the time, has to do with mortality, again, of white working class people. And so you see that even with all the brouhaha about healthcare, mortality for people between 45 and 54, we generally expect to decline. And pretty much it's declining all around the world, all demographic groups, and US working class people form an exception here. Mortality goes up. And the reason that mortality goes up has to do with essentially 3 causes. This suicide, and we all now hear recently about shocking numbers about suicide rising by something like 30%, and the opioid epidemic, and the last thing is liver disease that have to do with drinking. And if you want to know, people have done some interesting correlation. This is from March 4 of 2016. Remember, this is even before the end of the primaries. But the data came up in late 2015, and in March 2016, the Washington Post tried to correlate it with voting record. It became very clear that the districts where more people are dying are the districts where more people are voting for Donald Trump. So what's going on? So this is not, what we are not seeing is massive unemployment. We are not seeing it. What we are seeing is what a labor economist called job polarization. So this takes the whole labor market and divides it into 3 segments: low skill, high skill, and middle skill. And you can roughly correlate it with salary. High salaries means high skills, low salary means low skills. And let's compare over what happened over 30 years, 1983 to 2012. And you can see that the high skill occupations have actually, that piece of the pie has increased. This economy needs skills. So more and more jobs are in the high skill, and these people are well paid. The low skill is kind of stagnant, grows a little bit, not significantly, But the significant thing is that the middle skill part, which is the kind of, think of, for example, manufacturer employees. This is a middle skill job. It's middle skill because it paid decently. You know, these people were paid $20 to $25 an hour. That's $40,000 to $50,000 a year. That's a nice middle class income. And this piece has shrunk. These are the people very often, they have dropped out of the workforce because they have lots of jobs in manufacturing. They can upskill. We can take a truck driver and tell them we don't have a job driving trucks anymore, but you can write software for automated trucks, and that's upskilling, and that's very, very difficult for these people to do. Or they can downskill, but very often they say, I used to be paid $50,000 a year. Now they want me to work for $10 an hour. It's not worth my while doing this job. So they drop out of the job market. And in fact, we see it very clearly if we look at the evolution of wages over, again, from 1973 for the next 30 plus years. If you have an advanced degree, which is post-baccalaureate degree, you have done very well. Even if you have a college degree, you have done quite well. If you have some college, and huge number of people go to college but only get maybe, they don't get to 4-year degree, then you have just kept up. If you have high school or less than high school, again, you have lost ground. Now, when you look at this data, it doesn't say anything about causality. What's caused it? And you could debate, people are debating, and there are many factors you can put in, okay? They have to do with is it trade? Is it too much economic concentration? All kind of factors. And in 2014, there was a poll whether automation is a central reason for this, what we have seen here. And at that point, there's only a plurality of economists that agree that this is automation. And you see that 28% of economists agree or strongly disagree. But more data has come up since then. In 2017, there was a study from MIT that went area by urban area and correlated industrial robots deployment with job losses and found very strong linear correlation. And by the summer of last year, Laura Tyson, who was, I think she was the chief economic counselor for President Clinton, she's at Berkeley, and she said among economists, however, the consensus is that about 80% of the loss in US manufacturing jobs over the last 3 decades was the result of labor saving and productivity enhancing technological change, with trade coming a distant second. So automation is the major factor. And to understand partly what's going on, and what economists very often ignore, you have to think of the concept of a tipping point, or if you're a physicist, a phase transition, where suddenly there is a dramatic change because of, there's some phenomenon, think of what happens when you boil water, suddenly there is a dramatic change. And the biggest phase transition that is almost in our lifetime is the Industrial Revolution. We are today infinitely richer than people have been just 300 years ago. So if you're an economist in the year 1700, and somebody asks you to predict economic growth for the next 100 years, you would look back at the last 2,000 years of economic data, going back to the Roman Empire, and you say, about maybe 1.0% per year. But of course, you're going to be dramatically wrong because the Industrial Revolution happened and everything changed. And this would put very nicely by a Nobel Prize-winning economist Wassily Leontief in 1983, when he told the parable of the horses. And he imagined 2 horses in 1910 having conversation. And the new Luddite horse says, have you heard about the Ford Model T? I'm very worried. What jobs will be available to horses once cars become popular? And the neoliberal horse says nothing to worry about. Technology always destroys jobs for horses, but it creates new jobs that we cannot even imagine yet. Don't worry, there will be new jobs for horses. Well, as it happened, the new Luddite horse was right, because horse population peaked around 1915, and it's been going down since then, and today there are no jobs for horses. Horses are pets, okay? I mean, yes, you can take here a nice ride on a horse, but it's only, again, because you're doing it, not because the horse are really needed, it's just for fun. And so, what about this argument, the Industrial Revolution happened and we are all okay? Well, this argument is incredibly naive historically. yes, we've adapted to the industrial revolution. It took us about 200 years. The modern social welfare state is the response to the industrial revolution. It started, really developing only about 100 years. It matured only after World War II. It took us 200 years to adapt. This was not easy. Two communist revolutions killed about 100 million people. That's part of how we adapted to the Industrial Revolution. And so I find it deeply disappointed that we went on election 2 years ago, and really none of the major candidates talked at all about automation as a challenge. There was only one politician who was not running for office. And he's the only one that talked about automation is a big issue, number one. Two, we have to re-examine the social compact. We have to rethink the whole social compact is the way we organize our socio-economic life. And now we take everything for granted. But if you look at the history, it took a long time to create the structure that today we take for granted: the right to strike, the right to unionize, abolish child labor, 40-hour work week, equal pay for women and minority, health and safety laws. Some of these, I think, we're seeing dismantled as we speak. The new kid on the block is universal basic income. I will not talk about it. Scott Santens is going to talk about it later this session. But we already have now someone who's running for president in 2020 on the platform universal basic income. So I will close with quoting Jason Furman, an economist, who's the chairman of the Council of Economic Affairs of President Obama. And he wrote, there was a report about AI in July 2016, just 2 years ago. And he says, my worry is that this time could be, not that this time could be different when it comes to AI, but that this time could be the same as what we have had over the past generation. So if you just take the trend that I've shown you for the past 30, 40 years, and you just extend them, they're already pretty grim, and if you just extend them in a straight line, it looks even grimmer. That means that we have a huge policy challenge for us. We are focusing on education. That's what we are here for this day and a half. But equally well, it's about taxation, trade, housing, and the like. Just think of taxation. The last tax reform gave incentive for capital investment. So if you're making a capital investment, you get to depreciate it. If you're investing in human capital, it's an expense. It does not get the same kind of treatment. So our tax laws now give incentive to replace human workers by machines. Thank you very much.
All right, I think we're going to have a Q&A session at the end, but
yep.
You have another 5 minutes that we can do some question and answer to begin with so that we stay on schedule. So with that, does anybody have our first question?
Yeah, how do you reconcile the numbers you show with the unemployment rate at 3%?
So which percent? The unemployment rate?
Yeah.
So unemployment rate is very simple. Unemployment rate of let's say 3.8 is a percentage of people who are looking for a job and cannot find a job. And so you can improve the unemployment rate in two ways. One, more people finding jobs. The other way is more people not looking for a job. So what we have seen, there are a huge number of people, the people who are not in the labor force, that means they're not looking for a job. So they're completely out of the unemployment statistics. Okay? So if you see now that 20% of what we saw before, it was I think 18% of working class men are out of the job market, that means they are not reflected at all in unemployment. And so unemployment has been, again, the basically politicians of both parties have been pushing on the Bureau of Labor Statistics over the years to play with the definition, to make this number look better. As I say, if you are working 1 hour a week, that's it. You're not showing up as unemployed at all. So there are various measures of unemployment that measure what happens if you look at people who are working only part-time and they would like to work more. This measure that you hear about in the news all the time is called U3. There are other measures, but you never hear about them because the one measure that looks best for politicians is the one you hear about. David? Mike here? Oh, the question there? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I will give you the mic next. Fantastic talk, and I think it's great to look at history here as a lesson. One question I have is that technology also makes our lives better and makes things cheaper. And the automation that we're seeing makes all goods and healthcare and things cheaper. So I know that those numbers were adjusted for inflation, but should they also be adjusted for the amount that you can buy with those dollars, such that even if I've shaved $6,000 or $7,000 off my salary, but Walmart is selling everything at half the price because of all the automation we see, are we not net better off due to the benefits of technology?
So how to measure the cost of life increases is a huge ongoing debate. And in fact, there are some people who are saying, and it has huge implications because this rate, for example, determines how we're going to adjust Social Security payment, okay? So there is a huge debate about it. So indeed, if I would focus only on one measure here, if I only look at, let's say, declining, stagnating wages, then you could argue that somehow this is wrong, that does not reflect the fact that Wikipedia is free, and all kinds of things are differently, okay? So people argue because basically this is the way you compute cost of living is by some basket of things that you're going to buy, and this is the endless debate. What's the right basket to represent it, okay? So this is huge matter of debate. That's why I usually try to show a wealth of data, it's consistent, okay? And in fact, because I can give a long 1 hour talk, and there is much more data to show that I've shown here, and it all goes in the same direction, okay? So the stagnation of wages, the decline of the labor force participation. Another one, again, looks at how you divide the economy between capital and labor, and again, you see a decline of labor. So there are lots of indications that shows that labor, however you define it, is declining. But, it's true that almost on any number here, you find someone who will challenge this number. This number I'm reporting to you are numbers that come up usually from, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Fed data. So I'm using the best available economic figures, but it doesn't mean that there is no debate about every single number here. In economics, there is a debate about every single number. So one of the things that again, if you look at historically, when does Marxism come to fore? It's in the middle of the 19th century. What happened? So again, we forgot the history. What was Marx affected by? Marx read a book written by Engels called, somebody can correct me, The Condition of the British Working Class, which was horrible for the first 100 years. And it was so horrible that people said, we have to do something about it. And partly even the British political system started doing things, you have to remember, what was the penalty for sabotaging mechanical looms? Death. Okay, this was taken so seriously. The penalty for sabotage, which is throwing wooden shoes into a mechanical loom, was death. I mean, now we said, oh, well, we have adapted. This is historically facile and naive. This was a very, very difficult adaptation. So even if we say, you know what, we're simply going to repeat the same thing, and we're going to go through the same 200 years, then we're idiots. We're not learning from history. David.
Can we
stop
actually
here?
to stay on schedule and
later.
save that question for 11:30 when we do the panel discussion? Thank you. All right. With that, let's thank Moshe.